I now give the floor to Ms. Izumi Nakamitsu.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, before I start, I would like to extend my condolences to the families of and the people of Iran following the passing of President Ibrahim Raisi, Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdullahian, and other passengers in a tragic helicopter crash yesterday. Almost 27 months have passed since the Russian Federation launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in violation of the UN Charter. That represents over 800 days of death, destruction, widespread devastation, and immense suffering for the Ukrainian people. Regrettably, the security situation continues to deteriorate. The escalating attacks on Ukrainian villages, towns, and cities, including, in particular, in the Kharkiv region, have led to more civilian deaths and injuries, as well as massive destruction of civilian infrastructure. Strikes have also been reported inside the Russian Federation, reportedly also resulting in civilian casualties and damage to civilian infrastructure. The continued and intensified attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure are unacceptable. All parties to any armed conflict have an obligation to protect civilians in armed conflict and to ensure compliance with applicable international law, including international humanitarian law. Let me say it again. Deliberate and direct attacks against civilians and civilian infrastructure and indiscriminate attacks, including disproportionate attacks, are prohibited under international humanitarian law. All such attacks must stop immediately. Attention should also be given to the environmental damage as well as the impact on human health and ecosystems resulting from the use of weapons. Turning now to the subject of this briefing, over the last months, the provision of military assistance and transfers of arms and ammunition to the Ukrainian armed forces have continued. Much of the information from governments about their transfers of weapon systems and ammunition to Ukraine is available through open sources. These transfers have reportedly included heavy conventional weapons such as battle tanks, armored combat vehicles, combat aircraft, helicopters, large-calibre artillery systems, missile systems, and uncrewed combat aerial vehicles, as well as remotely operated munitions, small arms and light weapons, and their ammunition. There have also been reports of states transferring or planning to transfer weapons such as uncrewed aerial vehicles, ballistic missiles, and ammunition to the Russian armed forces, and that these weapons have been used in Ukraine. I reiterate that any transfer of weapons and ammunition must take place within the applicable international legal framework, including, of course, relevant Security Council resolutions. Reports related to the transfer and use of anti-personnel mines and cluster munitions in Ukraine are deeply concerning. There must be an immediate end to the use of these inherently indiscriminate weapons, which have a devastating and long-lasting humanitarian impact on civilians. Ukraine is now one of the world's most heavily mine-contaminated countries, and it will require decades of clearance efforts with the support of international community to make sure communities are safe from the threat of mines. Mr. President, the large-scale influx of arms and ammunition into any armed conflict raises significant concerns for peace and security, including as a result of diversion and proliferation, even after the conflict has ended. Importing, transit, producing and exporting states must act responsibly at every step along the arms and ammunition transfer chain to prevent diversion, illicit trafficking, and misuse. Pre-transfer risk assessments, marking and record-keeping practices, as well as tracing capabilities are of utmost importance. To prevent the diversion of conventional arms and regulate the international arms trade, states have established a number of arms control treaties and instruments. This includes the Arms Trade Treaty, the Firearms Protocol, the Program of Action on Small Arms and Light Weapons and its International Tracing Instrument, and the Global Framework for Through-Life Conventional Ammunition Management. Universal participation in the relevant treaties, as well as full and effective implementation of these treaties and instruments, must remain a priority. Mr. President, from 24th of February 2022 to 16th of May 2024, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights has verified that conflict-related violence has killed at least 11,017 civilians and injured 21,445 in Ukraine. It is very concerning that the number of injured civilians has increased significantly for the second month in a row. As in past months, the vast majority of civilian casualties are a result of the use of explosive weapons with wide area effect in populated areas. The Secretary General has consistently and unequivocally urged all sides to avoid the use of explosive weapons in populated areas. Such use is highly likely to result in an indiscriminate, direct and long-term harm, and to ultimately take combat out of urban areas altogether. I take this opportunity to refer to the political declaration on strengthening the protection of civilians from the humanitarian consequences arising from the use of explosive weapons in populated areas, adopted in November of 2022. Regrettably, the use of armed, uncrewed aerial vehicles and missiles continues to cause civilian deaths and injuries, as well as damage to civilian infrastructure. Just like any other weapons or weapon systems, armed uncrewed aerial vehicles and missiles must not be used in a manner inconsistent with international humanitarian law. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, I wish to reiterate the United Nations' commitment to support all meaningful efforts to bring a just and sustainable peace in Ukraine, guided by the United Nations Charter and international law, including relevant General Assembly resolutions. It is time to put an end to this war. I thank you very much for your attention.
I thank Ms. Nakamitsu for our important